Good morning, Methodist Monarchs. I'm sorry I could not be live with you today for the second half of this session, the circuit series on purity culture, religious trauma, and healing disembodiment. I'm actually in a meeting right now with an editor from a university press to discuss the next stage of the collection I'm editing with my colleague in the field, Mary Ramler. The title of the book that we're working on is called Bodies and Beliefs, Purity Culture and the Rhetoric of Religious Trauma. So some of what we'll cover today comes directly from that project. Before I dive into my talk, I want to once again extend that invitation to you all to reach out to me if you have questions or want to talk about things that come up for you, or you just want to learn more about embodiment studies or purity culture, any and all of those things. My email address is there, as well as my website. You can reach me at either one of those. So please feel free to reach out. I'll start today's session with a brief overview of religious trauma, and I do mean brief. There's so much that can be said about this. But I've limited it to a couple of descriptions and definitions. And in that context of understanding religious trauma, that's where I'll talk a little bit more about purity cultures and disembodiment that happens within those spaces specifically. So there aren't any direct details about sexual violence in the context of religious abuse, in part because I know that can be a very disembodying thing to be in a space where you are hearing these kinds of stories. But we will talk about what gendered violence looks like in these contexts. So the sexual violence in the context of religious abuse is more of a thematic element, and I do that, and I also want to extend this this kind of description to you at the beginning so that you can think through how you want to organize your time while you engage with these materials. So after that section, we'll do some exercises on becoming embodied, and really I have one exercise that I want to walk through with you, and then discuss very briefly, resources from trauma theory and therapy that might be available to you, which is connected to looking ahead to the future and thinking about what the world can look like in the afterlife of religious trauma. All right, so here we go. Understanding religious trauma. Now, you need to know that I'm a rhetorical scholar. My work is housed within the field of rhetoric, which is a very large and expansive field and hard to define. But I want to say that what this means is that I spend most of my time analyzing the rhetorical features of social systems and cultural constructions of identity. The study of rhetoric is really the study of energy, and I have some definitions of this here on this next slide. And as George Kennedy calls it, rhetoric is in part the energy that compels people to speak. So I put that full quote from George Kennedy up there on the slide, which you can see. As a field, rhetoric investigates how language is used to create knowledge, mediate power, and produce social change. Rhetoricians, such as myself, regard language as constitutive, meaning that we shape and are shaped by words. Our social worlds, all of our cultural constructs are shaped by language. And in fact, some rhetoricians have gone so far as to claim that rhetoric is the advocacy of realities. But don't worry, I'm not here to talk to you about the many definitions of rhetoric. Instead, I want us to think alongside each other's experiences and stories about the energies that make up our worlds. So understanding the rhetorics of religious trauma and the messages of purity culture is one way to guide this process and bring us back home into our bodies, similar to what we talked about in the session last week. Following psychologist Marlene Winnell, we understand religious trauma as a result of both the chronic abuses of harmful religion and the impact of severing one's connection with one's faith. That can look like a lot of different things. Specifically, though, religious trauma syndrome is a group of symptoms that arise in response to traumatic or stressful religious experiences. And religious trauma can manifest in many ways. No two people will have the exact same experience when it comes to religious trauma. So it's a pretty broad overview of religious trauma. And really at the heart of this is thinking about how rhetoric and religious trauma interact with each other. And part of this means giving language to experience, right? Doing that, giving language to experience, allows us the power to name what lives in and around us. It also gives us a greater capacity to listen and understand the experience of others. I talked about Judith Herman's work, Trauma and Recovery, a lot last week, so I'm not going to dive back into that. But I do have this quote here from her book, Truth and Repair, How Trauma Survivors Envision Justice. And here she writes that public truth-telling must be the first act of survivors' resistance, and recognizing the survivors' claim to justice must be the moral community's first act of solidarity. So there's a lot that goes into this quote and this idea of claiming justice. And the first step, as Herman says here, is public truth-telling. Public truth-telling is a very challenging process. It can sound like, all right, yeah, just, speak your truth of your truth, which is not necessarily disconnected from this message. But first, to have public truth-telling happen, you first need listeners, or at least one listener. Then you have to actually share your story in the hope that you are heard and believed. So I started writing my dissertation in 2017, a wild year, pre-COVID. And really, I didn't start writing the diss until 2019, really, truly right before COVID. In any case, in 2017 was when I started really formulating my comprehensive exams and thinking about what I wanted to say. And purity culture was the thing that came up for me over and over again. So much so that my dissertation advisor, or one of my committee members, told me, you have to write about purity culture, because if you write about anything else, it will just be an academic exercise, and that's not sustainable for a career, basically. So I felt empowered to write about purity culture in 2017 because it was right in the middle of the Me Too movement and the Church Too movement, a lesser known version of the Me Too movement. My story is the story of so many others who grew up inside purity culture. So before we get into the process of storytelling and public truth-telling, I want to start by thinking about purity culture in a little bit more detail. What is this obsession with purity? So we're going to get into the background of purity culture in a more detailed way. So in the broadest definition possible, purity culture is an evangelical phenomenon that grew in popularity in the 1990s and early 2000s. So you might remember things like the True Love Waits rallies, specifically the one that was held on the National Mall. Those of you who are students in the room, assuming there are students in the room, you probably don't remember those things. But in 1994, 210,000 young adults stood on the National Mall and signed these abstinence pledges, right? And that didn't happen out of thin air. There's a lot of rhetorical things going on there. So the rhetorical underpinnings of purity culture rely on teachings from abstinence only until marriage movement, from that movement. And they adhere to a very strict view on heterosexual marriage. So I make this distinction in my work. Purity culture is a really broad, like you can see, this is a very broad definition. So fundamentalist purity rhetorics is a little bit more specific to what I do in the work, in the book that I'm working on right now, and in all of my forthcoming, and in my dissertation and my forthcoming article. So fundamentalist purity rhetorics, they code gender in a way that position all women as in service to men. And what I mean by fundamentalist purity is a strict adherence to a specific set of values regarding gender and sexuality that situates femininity in service to masculinity with the presupposition that gender is fixed and assigned at birth. An example of this, well, several examples of this come from a book written by John and Stacey Eldridge. There's a lot of prominent examples of fundamentalist purity rhetorics in their text, specifically Wild at Heart, which was written by John Eldridge, and then Captivating, written by John and Stacey. So Wild at Heart is written to young men, written by a man. Captivating is written to young women, written by a man and his wife. And importantly, in that order. For instance, in one of Captivating's chapters titled Arousing Adam, the Eldridges claim that, this is a direct quote, women pretty much fall into one of three categories. Get ready for these three categories. Dominating women, desolate women, and arousing women. The Eldridges go on to explain that, another direct quote here, the first two are what happens to Eve as a result of the fall, and the third is a woman whose femininity is being restored by God and who offers it to others. So the arousing woman is the one whose femininity is being restored by God. When we break this down, the first two kinds of women here, desolate and dominating, are examples of sinful women, or women who have not confronted their inherent sinfulness. And the arousing woman is the example of godly femininity. In all cases, though, in all three of these instances, women are in service to men. They are either not invested in attracting a male partner, the desolate woman, which is a sin, or they are in need of nothing from a man, which is the dominant woman, and that is also a sin. Or they are, and this is a direct quote from the book, calling forth the best in a man by offering who she is as a woman, someone who offers her beauty and her true heart, which is, of course, what you want, the arousing woman, right? The third option. Not a sin. Not a sin to call forth the best in a man by offering all of yourself to that man. So those are the three categories that you got, ladies. You can either be dominating, desolate, or arousing. I won't go into any of the ones that I see myself as, but we're pretty limited in our options here. So rhetorically, positioning women who express independence from male bodies as dominating or desolate, and women who offer their hearts and beauty to men as alluring, as the arousing woman, creates an impossible binary. The Eldridges conclude this section by saying, and again, a direct quote here, "That is what a man wants to hear from his woman more than anything else. I need you. I need your strength." End of quote. If women do not give this to men, they are considered dominating or desolate. So if you don't say you don't need those things, as long as you can say that you need those things, you're in good standing. So I should mention here that Captivating is a New York Times bestseller, and Stacey Eldridge has sold over 3 million copies of her books. All right, so let's unpack this a little bit more. Evangelical gender ideology and the rhetorical messages of fundamentalist purity culture are really coded very closely in this. They allow abuse to circulate and flourish as women's bodies are positioned as either sinful or sexually in service to men. Purity rhetoric fuels systems of sexual abuse, and to believe that the kinds of gendered violence happening in religious contexts are limited to those specific spaces might make us feel better. However, religious spaces are not self-contained. The rhetorical power of religious violence, specifically against women, also flows through legislative, educational, and social venues. All right, so purity culture doesn't exist in isolation from religious institutions, though, in fact, without the apparatus of Christianity, purity culture would be, well, non-existent. It relies on teachings from leaders within these larger institutions. As one example of this, I will share something from James Dobson's book, his 1983 book, Love Must Be Tough. James Dobson is the founder of Focus on the Family, massive evangelical organization. And he shares in this book stories from women who have written to him seeking advice for handling domestic abuse they experience in marriage. In response to a woman who was violently abusing her, Dobson advised her to deliberately agitate her husband, writing, "Let him rage if he must rage." He goes on to say a lot of other things about that women should provoke their husbands to anger and to the point of them hitting the woman, and then they should go to church leaders. He has like a very prescriptive method for this kind of deliberately agitating a man. When Dobson's book, Love Must Be Tough, was reprinted in 2007, it had sold over 1 million copies, and it continues to receive rave reviewers from its readers. The foundational theological concepts of purity culture interanimate every sector of life for those who are raised within that discourse. Education, church, social life, personal life, hobbies, relationships are all woven together in the tapestry of sexual morality. And sexual morality, as we just learned, is coded quite differently for female bodies. All right, so in this next session, I want to think about, in this next section of today's talk, before we get into the embodied somatic practice, is this concept of storytelling, going back to Judith Herman's idea about public truth-telling. I've often wondered what kind of power would come with clarity around my body and the stories that it holds. All I've ever known and have had access to lives within my body. It's in my fingers as I type. It's in my feet as I walk. It's in the words that my mouth has formed while I was trying to exit the church basements and the pages and pages of purity culture's texts. The power of a story is that it provides a place to belong. Sometimes that story is from an archive. Other times the story comes from data collected or interviews conducted over the span of several years. But in all cases, our bodies are archives for our stories as well. What remains constant in my story and what I hope to be the most important are not the details of events, but the act of telling. And I'm going to circle back to this at the end of our somatic practice to say a couple of things about hope. So on that note, let us get into this becoming embodied somatic practice, which I had the book around here somewhere, but I don't know where it is now. In any case, this comes from Ken Michaels, that's his name, his book on becoming the body is what it's called. So what I'm going to do in this section is actually, let's see if I can get, there we go. Hopefully everybody can hear that. Some meditative music. All right, so we're first going to talk about what the baseline body scan exercise is. A body scan is a systematic and intentional mindfulness exercise that involves concentrating on each part of the body individually. A body scan aims to increase awareness of the body's sensations and cultivate a sense of relaxation and calm. The body scan helps to release tension and stress. It promotes relaxation, improves sleep, reduces pain, and increases overall well-being. It is also a great place to start to increase mind-body awareness and identify where we hold emotions in the body, because the body does keep the score. Our bodies carry all of the events of our days, of our weeks, of our months, years, lives, right? So a large part of somatic practice in the context of abuse is to first get in touch with what is happening in your body. So while we're thinking actively about everything I just shared around purity culture and the rhetorics of religious trauma, and the ways that religious trauma is stored within our bodies, we're going to walk through a body scan together in the next several minutes of this practice. All right, so what I'll say, how to get started. Obviously, you're in a room with other people. So this is, I want you to do what is going to be comfortable for you throughout this process. You don't have to lie down. You don't have to close your eyes if you don't want to. This is really something I'm going to walk through these steps and engage with this as you feel comfortable. So if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, do that. When you're alone, though, this is how you would want to start this practice for yourself. Find a comfortable position, either sitting or lying down. If you choose to sit, ensure that your back is straight and your chin is tucked in. All right, so you want to think about, imagine a string pulling up the back of your head to create a neutral spine. If you opt to lie down, keep your chin slightly tucked to maintain this kind of posture. During the exercise, I recommend placing your palms flat on your legs to help direct your focus inward. All right, so now that you're there, thinking about the position you're in, thinking about your feet being planted on the ground, your hands on your legs, you can, again, choose to close your eyes or relax your gaze here at something across the room. And now, what we're going to do next is imagine a warm glow surrounding your body, almost encapsulating you. Draw your awareness to your breath. To help bring your focus inward, consider counting down from 102s, such as 98, 96, 94, and so on until you reach 0. I'm not going to count down to 0 with you all today, but that is something that you can do on your own in your own practice with this kind of body scan. Start by focusing on your feet and toes. How do they feel? Bring your awareness to them. Are they tight, loose, or neutral? Neutrality, numbness, or a lack of sensation can also be a feeling. Slowly go across each toe, focusing your awareness on each of them. Trust yourself and your instincts as you move up your shins and slowly to your knees, feeling your joints and the muscles around them. Allow yourself to experience any tension or discomfort without trying to force it away or ignore it. If your mind jumps around the body and you have trouble focusing, try counting down from 50 while concentrating on each body part before moving on to the next. If you sense discomfort in your body, such as tightness in your abdomen or a pinch in your arm, give it your attention and trust your instincts. The process of exploring your inner self has no set structure. Have a route in mind, but be open to detours. Keep part of your awareness on your breath. Breathe in through your belly, feeling your abdomen fill, and release any tension in your body after every exhale, allowing your shoulders to sink and your jaw to soften. Next, direct your attention to your thighs and hips. Take a moment to breathe deeply and focus on this area. Move on to your abdomen, including the outer skin, your organs, and the base of your spine. As you bring your awareness to this area, feel a warm glow surrounding this area and allow any tension or discomfort to be released. Pay attention to any specific sensations or tightness you may feel in your stomach and place your awareness on these areas to help relax them. Sit with any of these parts for as long as you like, while breathing slowly and deeply. Go up now to your chest and heart, envisioning the warm glow surrounding this area. Take note of any sensations or tightness you may feel in your chest or heart, and consciously release them with each exhale. Placing your awareness on a specific part of your body can be difficult. It can be extremely difficult. It helps to instead focus on the area around your desired focus, such as focusing on the area surrounding your heart instead of the heart itself. Allow your focus to settle on your throat. Does it feel scratchy or tight? Ease any tension by swallowing a few times, allowing the muscles in your throat to relax and open. Let the relaxation move into your jaw and head. Imagine a warm glow surrounding your head, both outside and inside. Concentrate on the center of the forehead. Observe this encapsulation from an aerial viewpoint. Notice where any tension is being held, and let your focus naturally gravitate to that area. Take 10 deep breaths, relaxing each part of your body. As of now, the body scan is finished. Stay in this relaxed state for as long as you wish. Focus on different areas of the body where you feel built up tension and work to release it, or go back down the body in the opposite order, starting with the top of your head and ending with your toes. Tune into your body and allow it to reveal where emotions are being held. When ready, slowly bring your awareness back to the physical world. Wiggle your toes and fingers. Gently open your eyes and take in your surroundings. Look at your hands and feet. Now here, we can follow up this body scan with a journal entry, something that is a very important part of somatic practice, reflecting on what came up for you during that time. So for some or all of you, this could be a somewhat uncomfortable, and maybe even the first time you've done something like this, which would mean that it's most likely a very uncomfortable kind of experience. It's not typical. We don't set aside a lot of time for ourselves in our daily lives when we're rushing to and from things, or even when we're sitting and relaxing. Very rarely are we placing awareness on our bodies in this kind of way and thinking, not thinking, but feeling and letting ourselves feel what is stored there. And so in doing this kind of body scan, it's a really beautiful way to let your body tell you what's going on. And what I'll say about this as we kind of wrap up and think about the next what this looks like going forward, the next stages of embodiment practice for you all individually. For some of you, it might be you're not ready for this kind of thing, right? And that's okay too. Or you don't feel like it's something you need right now, and that's also okay. And I think this is also a way to really focus on understanding what we need and listening to what our bodies are telling us we need, right? So if your body is telling you, that's not for me right now, that's fine. For those of you who are feeling whatever you're feeling in the aftermath of this, noticing emotions that are coming up for you for the first time, or maybe just bodily sensations that you've never been aware of before. When I first started doing somatic practice and trauma therapy, one of the things that was so startling was, the minute that you're in the middle of this kind of traumatic memory or whatever it is your body's holding on to, you're not thinking about what your body is actually doing. So working with a trauma therapist, which is one of the things I want to encourage those of you to consider as if you're thinking about extending this kind of practice. Trauma therapy is a space that focuses specifically on this kind of thing. So one of the things that was always most shocking for me was what came up in repeated patterns. And I inevitably always felt tension in my abdomen and in my neck. And like those two spaces specifically. And so trauma therapy really did help me work through a lot of where I was housing my lived experiences with trauma. And in practicing this kind of somatic experience and doing things like body scans, we're able to get into those memories where they're stored in the fibers of our body, right? And so a lot of this, following up body scans with journal entries, brings us back to this concept of public truth-telling. And if we're ever going to hope to tell public truths, we have to first be able to tell our truths to ourselves. We have to be able to hear the truth that our body holds, right? We have to be able to bring our awareness to what's happening internally and across time and space as our bodies hold on to our lived experiences. So I'll circle back to what remains constant in my story. And what I find to be the most important are not the details of events, but the act of telling. And telling my story also means deciding what I share in my public spaces and deciding what parts of my story I only tell to myself for right now. So one of the things that can be really useful in this process of healing and becoming embodied is write down a list of things that you're not ready to touch, right? If there are stories that you're not ready for yet, or stories that you don't want to share, put those in writing and put them aside. Those are there for you. And by naming those things and keeping them safe for yourself, you have more agency. You're freeing up space in your life to share the things that you can share, right? And you don't have to worry about everything else tumbling out, right? And that's the first step, I think, in regaining our own autonomy over our bodies, is deciding what is ours and what we want to share, and how we want to share that, right? So I'm at a point now where I very rarely share the details of my traumatic experiences, my compound, complex, chronic traumatic experiences. There are things I will share. There are things I'm very willing to talk about, and things I'm very willing to keep to myself. So, and having that list, having this kind of box that is my own box, has allowed me to do that kind of work and has been a large part of my healing process. So, of course, the telling happens in many different ways and in many different channels, but the threads of our stories remain the same. In telling the story, what I find most empowering is that I am no longer in need of approval from the evangelical God to know that I am good. I simply need to be present to myself and to hold a hope in my body, to leave space for hope inside my body. hope for a better world, hope for those who are coming after me, hope for those who are in this space with me, hope for my future self, and I can even extend hope to my past self, right? So what this hope means, though, and I want to be very careful about how we articulate hope and what hope does for us in spaces like this. Because so often, in sharing and telling our stories, not everybody will know how to hold your stories. Not everybody will know how to respond to your stories. What we hear a lot of very kind of empty platitudes about hopefulness and, relying on God, or which I don't mean to say that that's something that's trite, but especially if that's part of your spiritual practice, you should engage in that. But often people don't always know how to respond, right? And so hope, though, in this context, the hope that I'm talking about here, the hope that we want to hold for ourselves, is something that, as Sarah Med and Cheryl Glenn articulated, hope is something that urges us to think about this kind of tenacity. Hope is not a blind optimism, but it's a matter of being tenacious. Hope is an unruly belief against the odds that our bodies will come to matter, that they will shape the matter of our values and our systems. And so before we can start thinking about what restructuring our systems might look like, and how to maybe dismantle violent religious structures like the Southern Baptist Convention, which has been under investigation by the Department of Justice for over a year now, for the 700 cases of sexual abuse that were covered up over the course of several years, right? That is a system that desperately needs some critical intervention. But before we can start to even think about what that intervention looks like, we have to be present for ourselves, and we have to be able to think about how hope lives inside of our bodies, right? As a kind of tenacious spirit against the odds that our stories will come to matter. So on that note, what I want us to do, or how I want to end this, is to just pull up the slide again, the beginning slide, with my email address in there, and say that as you work through these things, or if you need to not work through these things right now, that is also okay. At any point in time, though, if you want to talk through other resources or think about what trauma therapy might look like for you, I would love to connect. I've also recently been doing a lot of very intense EMDR, which is a form of trauma therapy. And so I'm happy to talk about that process as well. I know EMDR has been a very healing practice for so many people who have complex PTSD. And so, again, very willing to talk about those kinds of things one-on-one. If you would like to learn more, or even just share some of how you have been processing these things, or how, what embodiment looks like for you in this journey. So please feel free to reach out to me at vhauser@writing.ucsb.edu. And hopefully I will be able to share a copy of my book with you all soon. On that note, I will let you go for the day. Enjoy your Wednesday afternoons, and thank you for being present to yourself in this process, and present for all of this work that we're doing together and individually. All right. Bye.